The day I moved into my first house, the president of the Homeowners Association left a violation notice on my door before the moving truck had even pulled away. By the end of my first year, she had fined me $14,000 for crimes against landscaping, mailbox height, and the color of my front door. She thought she had found her newest victim, a single woman, new to the neighborhood, with no one to back her up. What she didn't know was that I spent 12 years as a paralegal, that I read every word of the HOA bylaws the night I moved in, and that she had just picked a fight with the one person on the street who actually knew the rules better than she did. My name is Rebecca Hayes. I'm 41 years old. And this is the story of how the most feared woman in our neighborhood spent a year fining me into submission, and how I quietly used her own rulebook to end her reign entirely. Let me set the scene, because to understand Gail Thornberry, you have to understand the kingdom she ruled. I bought my house in a development called Maplewood Greens. It is on the surface an ordinary suburban neighborhood, tidy lawns, 2-car garages, a community pool, the whole picture. I had saved for 11 years to buy that house. It was the first thing I had ever owned, and I cannot fully describe to you what it meant to a woman who had spent her entire adult life renting, moving, renting again. To finally stand in a kitchen that was mine and know that no landlord could ever ask me to leave. I cried the day I got the keys. It was the proudest moment of my life. You have to understand where I came from to understand why that house mattered so much. I grew up in apartments my mother could barely afford, moving every year or two, always one rent increase away from packing up again. I learned, young, that a place you live in can be taken from you at any time by people with more power than you. I spent my 20s and 30s the same way, renting, never settling, never daring to plant anything because I'd just have to leave it. So when I finally closed on that little house in Maplewood Greens at the age of 40, after 11 years of saving every dollar I could, it was not just a purchase. It was the end of a lifetime of feeling like I existed at someone else's permission. It was, I thought, the place where no one could push me around ever again. The irony of what happened next is not lost on me. And presiding over Maplewood Greens, as she had for 19 unbroken years, was the president of the Homeowners Association, a woman named Gail Thornberry. Gail was in her early 60s, and she ran the HOA the way a minor dictator runs a small, frightened country. She had been president for 19 years because nobody dared run against her, and nobody dared run against her because everyone had learned what happened to people who crossed Gail. She controlled the Architectural Review Committee. She controlled the fines. She controlled the community newsletter, which she used like a state propaganda outlet, naming and shaming residents who had displeased her. And she had, over 19 years, built a network of loyalists on the board, 3 other women who voted however Gail voted and asked no questions, which meant that Gail's word was, functionally, law in Maplewood Greens. I want to be fair and say that homeowners associations exist for real reasons. Shared standards, property values, a mediating body for disputes, these are not bad things. But an HA is only as good as the people running it, and in the wrong hands, the power to fine and the power to enforce become exactly what they became in Gail Thornberry's hands, a small, petty tyranny, run for the satisfaction of one woman who had discovered, late in life, that controlling 40 households gave her a feeling she could not get anywhere else. She came for me immediately. I think I was simply new, fresh meat, an unknown quantity, a single woman with no husband to make trouble and no established friendships on the street to rally support. Gail had a predator's instinct for isolation, and I was, on paper, isolated. The first violation notice appeared on my door, as I said, before the moving truck had even left. It cited me for unauthorized placement of personal property in common sight lines, which, when I decoded the bureaucratic language, meant that my moving boxes were visible on my own porch on the day I was moving in. The fine was $50. I remember standing there in the doorway of my brand new house, sweaty and exhausted from carrying boxes, reading a $50 fine for the crime of moving into the home I owned, and feeling the first cold drop of what the next year would hold. I could have fought it then, but I was tired and new, and I did not yet understand what I was dealing with. So I paid the $50. That, I would later understand, was the worst thing I could have done, because to a predator like Gail, compliance is not the end of the hunt. It is the confirmation that she had chosen correctly. A person who pays the first unjust fine without a fight is a person who will pay the next one. I had, without meaning to, told Gail Thornberry that I was exactly the victim she'd hoped I'd be. And so it began. Over the following year, the violations came in a steady, escalating stream. My lawn was non-compliant because the grass was, by Gail's personal measurement, half an inch too long. My mailbox post was the wrong shade of brown. My garbage bins were placed 18 inches from where the bylaws, or Gail's interpretation of the bylaws, required them. I planted flowers in my own front bed and was fined for unapproved landscaping alterations because I had not submitted a form to the Architectural Review Committee, a form I had not known existed, requesting permission to plant marigolds in my own yard. And then there was the newsletter. I should explain the newsletter because it was Gail's favorite weapon and the one that did the most to keep an entire neighborhood afraid. Once a month, Gail published the Maplewood Greens community newsletter, and tucked into it, between the pool hours updates and the reminders about recycling day, was a section she called Compliance Corner. It was a list of residents who had committed violations that month by address, sometimes by name. It was, in plain terms, a public shaming column, and Gail clearly relished writing it. In my third month, I made it into Compliance Corner for the marigolds. There it was, in print, delivered to all 40 households, my address, and the words unapproved landscaping, repeat offender. Repeat offender. Over flowers. I remember standing at my mailbox reading it, my face hot, knowing that every neighbor on the street was reading the same thing about me over their morning coffee. That is what 19 years of Gail Thornberry had built, a neighborhood where a grown woman could be made to feel like a criminal for planting marigolds, and where everyone else stayed quiet and compliant precisely so they would not be next in Compliance Corner. The front door was the one that broke something open in me. I painted my front door a deep, lovely blue. It was, I thought, a small joy, the first paint color I had ever chosen for a door that belonged to me. Within 48 hours, a violation notice appeared. The color was not on the approved palette. The fine was $500, plus a daily fine of $50 for every day the door remained, in Gail's words, in violation until I repainted it an approved shade of beige. I stood there, looking at my beautiful blue door and the notice taped beside it, and something shifted in me. Because I had reached, finally, the thing that Gail Thornberry, in 19 years of bullying frightened residents, had apparently never once encountered. She had found the wrong woman. She had no idea what I did for a living. Let me tell you who I actually am, the part Gail never bothered to learn. For 12 years, before I changed careers, I worked as a paralegal. And not just any paralegal. I worked in real estate and property law. I spent 12 years of my life reading deeds, surveys, covenants, easements, and yes, homeowners association bylaws. I have read more HOA governing documents than Gail Thornberry has ever fined a resident. I know the difference between what an HOA is allowed to do and what an HOA merely gets away with doing because the residents don't know any better. And the gap between those two things, I would discover, was the entire foundation of Gail's 19-year reign. So that night, the night of the blue door, I did what I should have done the day I moved in. I sat down at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and the complete governing documents of the Maplewood Greens Homeowners Association, all 140 pages of them, and I read every single word. Twice. The way I used to read them for clients, with a highlighter and a legal pad, looking not for what the document said on the surface, but for the structure underneath, the rules that govern the rule makers. And what I found over the course of that long night was extraordinary. I found, first, that nearly every fine Gail had levied against me was procedurally invalid. The bylaws laid out a specific, mandatory process for issuing a violation, a written notice, a cure period during which the resident could fix the issue without penalty, a right to a hearing before the board, and only then, if the violation was upheld. A fine. Gail had skipped all of it. She issued fines instantly, with no cure period and no hearing, because in 19 years no one had ever known they were entitled to one. Every fine she had ever issued to me, and almost certainly to every resident before me, was very likely void. But that was just the beginning. Because the deeper I read, the more I began to understand that Gail Thornberry had a much larger problem than a few improperly issued fines. And it had to do with the boundary of her own backyard. Here is what I found. The bylaws reference the community's official recorded plat, the master survey map, filed with the county, that defined every property line and every piece of common area in Maplewood Greens. Out of pure professional habit, I pulled that plat from the county records the next morning, the way I'd pulled 1,000 of them for clients. And I overlaid it carefully against the current satellite imagery of the neighborhood. I almost missed it. I was checking the common area boundaries mostly out of thoroughness, not suspicion. I wanted to understand the full shape of the community before I made any move. I went lot by lot, comparing the recorded lines to what was actually on the ground. Most of them matched. And then I got to Gail's lot at the end of the cul-de-sac, backing onto the largest stretch of common green space in the development. And the lines did not match. Not even close. I sat forward. I zoomed in. I cross-checked the plat's measurements against the scale of the aerial image twice, because a finding like this is worthless if you're sloppy, and I am never sloppy. There was no mistake. Gail Thornberry's backyard had quietly grown. For 19 years, Gail's backyard had not stopped at her property line. At some point, I was able to date it, roughly, from old aerial photos I pulled from a historical imagery archive. Watching the fence creep outward across the years like a slow tide, Gail had extended her fence, built a large flagstone patio, and installed an entire ornamental garden, complete with a decorative pond that encroached more than 15 feet into the community's common area. The very common area whose sanctity she had spent 19 years enforcing against everyone else. She had, in short, annexed a substantial piece of shared community land for her own private use, in direct and serious violation of the exact governing documents she wielded as a weapon. The woman who fined me $500 for a blue door had stolen 15 feet of community property for her private patio and gotten away with it for 19 years because no one had ever thought to check the survey of the person checking everyone else. I sat with that knowledge for a few days, because I understood that I now held something powerful, and I have learned from 12 years of watching people win and lose disputes that power held quietly is far stronger than power spent loudly. My instinct, the human instinct, was to march to Gail's door and confront her. I did not. My father, a calm and careful man, used to tell me, never reveal your strongest card to win a small hand. Wait for the hand worth winning. So I waited. I did several things first, all quietly. I requested, in writing, as was my legal right under the bylaws and state HOA law, the complete financial records of the association for the past several years. Gail was required to provide them, and she did, grudgingly, clearly assuming I was just an annoyance making a nuisance request. I read every page, and in those records, I found the second pillar of what would bring her down: the fines. Over 19 years, Gail had collected an enormous sum in resident fines, and the records of how that money had been spent were, to put it gently, incomplete. There were payments to vendors that could not be fully accounted for. There was a pattern that any paralegal who had worked a fraud case would recognize instantly. I am not going to overstate it. I could not prove embezzlement from my kitchen table. But I could see, clearly, that the association's finances under Gail Thornberry would not survive a real audit. And I made certain I had copies of everything. I also, quietly, did the thing Gail had never bothered to do to me. I got to know my neighbors. I walked the street in the evenings. I introduced myself. And what I discovered was that the entire neighborhood was living under the same quiet fear I had felt, that nearly every household had its own story of an unfair fine, a petty humiliation in the newsletter, a dispute with Gail that they had lost because they didn't know the rules and she did. They were not loyal to Gail. They were afraid of her. And fear, unlike loyalty, evaporates the instant someone demonstrates that the thing being feared can be beaten. The bylaws I had noted on that first long night contained one more provision that Gail had relied on everyone never reading. Any member of the association could call a special meeting to hold a vote of no confidence in a board member, including the president, provided they obtained signatures from a certain percentage of households requesting the meeting. In 19 years, no one had ever gathered those signatures because no one had ever believed it was possible to remove Gail. But the provision was right there on page 91, where it had always been. I gathered the signatures. It took 3 weeks. I went door to door, calmly, and I did not badmouth Gail. I simply told each neighbor that I had read the bylaws, that I believed many of the fines we had all paid were invalid, and that there was a lawful process to hold the board accountable. And would they sign to request a meeting? The relief on people's faces, the dawning hope that the thing they had feared for so long might actually be challenged, I will remember it for a long time. I gathered nearly 3 times the signatures I needed. I want to tell you about one of those doors, because it stayed with me. 3 houses down lived an elderly man named Mr. Okafor, who had been in Maplewood Greens longer than almost anyone. When I explained why I was there, he was quiet for a moment, and then he went into his house and came back with a shoebox. Inside it were 19 years of violation notices and fine receipts. He had kept every one. He had been fined, over the years, for everything from a wind chime to the height of his tomato plants to a flag he flew for a country he had emigrated from decades ago. He had paid all of it, thousands of dollars, because he was an immigrant who had been taught to never make trouble, to keep his head down, to comply. And he looked at me, this dignified old man holding a shoebox of his own quiet humiliations, and he said, "You really think we can do something? After all this time?" And I told him yes. And his hand shook a little as he signed. That was the moment I understood this was no longer about my blue door or my $14,000. It was about a whole street of people who had been made small, for years, by one person who counted on them never pushing back. The special meeting was called. Gail, I am told, was incandescent. She tried to have the meeting declared invalid. She could not, because I had followed the bylaws, her bylaws, to the precise letter. She tried to pack the meeting with her 3 loyalists. It didn't matter, because this was a vote of the full membership, and the full membership had been waiting 19 years. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, and nearly every household in Maplewood Greens came. I had never seen the room so full. Gail sat at the front, at the board table, flanked by her 3 loyalists, with the rigid, furious posture of a monarch who cannot believe the peasants have been allowed into the throne room. And when the floor was opened, I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I have found that you almost never need to. I began with the fines. I explained, calmly and in plain language, the mandatory process the bylaws required for every single violation, the written notice, the cure period, the right to a hearing. And then I explained that, to my knowledge, not one fine in 19 years had followed that process. I held up the bylaws, open to the relevant page. I said that this meant the fines we had all paid were very likely invalid and very likely refundable, and that this alone was grounds for serious concern about the board's conduct. I watched the room absorb this. I watched 40 households realize, simultaneously, that the money Gail had taken from them might have been taken unlawfully. Then I moved to the finances. I laid out, factually and without accusation, what the association's own records showed, the large sums collected, the gaps in accounting, the vendor payments that could not be explained. I did not say the word embezzlement. I did not have to. I simply said that the records raised questions that only an independent, professional audit could answer, and that I would be formally requesting one. And then, only then, when the hand was finally worth winning, I played my strongest card. I asked the clubhouse's projector to be turned on. I had prepared for this. And I displayed the recorded plat of Maplewood Greens, the official county survey, on the screen where the whole room could see it. Beside it, I put a current aerial image of the neighborhood, pulled that week. And I walked the room through it, slowly, the way I used to walk a jury through an exhibit. Here is the common area, I said, tracing the boundary. Here is where it is supposed to end. And here, I overlaid the two images, is where Gail Thornberry's fence actually sits. I let the gap between the two lines speak for itself. 15 feet. A patio. A garden. A decorative pond. All of it built on land that belonged to every single person in that room. The room was silent for a moment. And then it was not silent at all. There was a sound that went through the crowd, a kind of collective intake of breath that turned, very quickly, into something angrier. The sound of 40 households realizing at once that the woman who had fined them for marigolds and mailboxes and the color of their doors had been sitting, the entire time, on a patio she'd built by stealing their shared land. I looked at Gail Thornberry, and for the first time in 19 years, she had nothing to say. The woman who had a citation for everything, a rule for everyone, a humiliating line in the newsletter for every resident who stepped out of place, sat at that table with her mouth slightly open and no words coming out. One of her 3 loyalists actually slid her chair a few inches away from Gail's, a small physical act of abandonment that I don't think she even noticed herself doing. Because there is no procedural objection, no loyalist vote, no bureaucratic maneuver that can answer a survey map. The map does not care how long you have ruled. The map does not care how loud you are or how many people you have frightened. The map simply shows where the line is and who crossed it. Gail, I said, and I kept my voice gentle, which I think unsettled her more than anger would have. For 19 years, you've enforced these documents against every person in this room. You fined Mr. Okafor for a wind chime. You fined me for marigolds. You put our addresses in the newsletter so the whole street could watch us be punished. I've simply done what none of us ever thought to do. I read them. And then I read them about you too. The vote of no confidence passed by a margin that I am told had never been seen in the history of any HOA in the county. Gail Thornberry was removed as president and removed from the board entirely, in a single evening, by the neighbors she had ruled for 19 years. Here is what happened after. The new board, and I'll come to who was on it, commissioned the independent financial audit I had called for. I won't tell you it found a clean, simple crime, because real life is rarely that tidy. But it found enough irregularity, enough unaccounted for money, that the matter was referred to the authorities, and Gail spent the following year dealing with consequences far more serious than a vote. The encroachment behind her house was addressed too. She was required, by the association she had once ruled, to remove her fence, her patio, and her ornamental garden, and to restore the 15 feet of common land she had stolen. I am told she did it slowly and bitterly and alone. And the fines. The new board reviewed 19 years of improperly issued fines, and where it was possible, residents were refunded. I received back every dollar of my own $14,000, the blue door, the marigolds, the moving boxes, all of it. I used part of it to repaint my front door the exact same deep, lovely blue, this time with the cheerful approval of an architectural review committee that no longer existed to torment anyone. As for who was on the new board, the neighbors asked me to be president. I declined. I had not done any of this to become the next Gail Thornberry, and I told them so, and I think they respected it. Instead, I agreed to serve as the board's secretary, and I rewrote our governing documents from top to bottom to strip out the ambiguities Gail had exploited, to guarantee every resident's right to notice and a hearing, and to make the finances transparent and auditable by any member at any time. The HOA of Maplewood Greens is, today, a genuinely good one. Boring, even. Boring is exactly what a good HOA should be. I want to leave you with the thing my father taught me, the thing that turned out to be the master key to all of it. A bully's power is almost always built on a single bet that you will never check. Gail Thornberry ruled for 19 years not because she was powerful, but because she was confident that no one would ever read the rules she enforced, pull the survey she relied on, or request the records she controlled. Her entire kingdom was built on the assumption that everyone around her was too busy, too intimidated, or too uninformed to look. The most quietly devastating thing you can do to a person like that is the simplest thing in the world. You look. You read the document. You pull the map. You request the records. You do the boring, patient, unglamorous work that the bully is betting you will never do, and almost every time, you find that the throne was made of paper the whole time, and that all it ever needed was one person willing to actually read it. My name is Rebecca Hayes. She fined me $14,000 and thought she'd found an easy victim. She forgot to ask what I did for a living. And it turns out the woman who enforced the rules for 19 years had never once read them as carefully as the new girl on the street. If this story meant something to you, stay a while. There are more like it here, stories about the small tyrants who rule through fear and the calm, patient, perfectly documented people who finally bring them down. No shouting, no drama. Just someone who decided to read the rules, pull the map, and check. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.